Right, now for the latest on how the markets have responded to this outcome of the National Assembly, I'm now joined by Newzroom Afrika's business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa. Xolani, good evening. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. 2 weeks ago, we saw the rand slump, which is over 3%, as investors were digesting news of a possible resignation of President Cyril Ramaphosa and the implications that would have on South Africa's budget deficit. How have the markets responded today?
Good evening, Thabo. Well, there was a reversal to the misfortunes of the rand after this particular decision by the National Assembly not to adopt the Section 89 report. But, as you have said, we saw the rand tanking 2 weeks ago when the decision, it was expected that President Cyril Ramaphosa would resign, or there was rumors of that. And we saw a lot of market volatility, a lot of investors selling the rand, and even the government bonds, which means that government bonds, which they actually use to lend money, to actually borrow money from the market, that would have actually sent up the cost of borrowing for the government, skyrocketing. We saw the 10-year bond actually nose diving on that day. Today, it was sort of a similar day because the markets do not like political uncertainty, particularly because they link the political leadership to that of the policy direction of a country. And we saw the sell-off 2 weeks ago. It was not as defined today as it was 2 weeks ago. And we spoke to a market analyst, Carmen Belwane, to actually make sense of what was happening in the run-up to this afternoon's vote on that Phala Phala report. And this is what Carmen Belwane had to say, of course, taking into account that there are other factors, global factors, that impact on the movement of the rand, but the domestic factor that was high up in the minds of investors was this particular vote this afternoon. Take a listen.
There's been lots of concern around what the vote is going to be. Sentiment seems to show that we may still see the president remain as the president. If that's not the case, that's definitely going to cause some volatility for the rand. And then add to that this week as well, we are going to see the Fed's decision, which is definitely going to have an impact as well. So as you've mentioned, emerging market currencies have been under pressure. And these are likely to be the forces behind that at the moment for the rand.
Let's take a look now how the rand fared today after that particular vote. In fact, if we look at it right now, at 12:15 this afternoon, you saw the rand actually ticking up, losing steam against the US dollar. And that's a huge sign of what the markets actually thought at that very same time, going from 17.45 to 17.75 to the US dollar in a matter of hours. And it stayed there for quite a while until later on in the afternoon when the votes were actually taking place. This basically means, Thabo, that those markets analysts, those who are investors, those who play the stock market, who have the rand in hand, actually were selling the rand in the lead up to this vote. The rand losing value, which is something that we've seen in the past when, for example, a former finance minister, Nhlanhla Nene, was actually fired by President Jacob Zuma back then. And as you can see, as the afternoon wore off, as you can see now, it's standing at 17.25. Clearly, the rand actually gaining some momentum in terms of those losses that it had registered in the run-up to this particular vote. What happens in the political spectrum, Thabo, it has a direct reflection and an implication on what happens in the markets. And it's quite clear that this is what the rand has had to contend with for years.
It's a real-time and almost emotional reaction to a political event that is taking place in the country. Now that we are on the other side of this parliamentary process, does it mean then there will be a settling, especially in the currency markets?
Absolutely not, Tabo. This is not the end of the market volatility in terms of the price of the rand and the value of the rand. As we head into this week's the elective conference of the ANC, it's quite an important part that the rand you will see, and the bond market you will see, you should expect to see them actually reacting quite negatively, because while there has been some certainty that has come from this particular vote, which would have triggered a possible impeachment of the president, this is uncertain headed to this elective conference. And those who are in the markets, at least those I've spoken to, are still of the view that they will play it quite close to their chest, because when you go back to 2017, Thabo, it wasn't that big of a margin that President Cyril Ramaphosa won by. So there's still a lot of uncertainty around what is going to happen this week, and you should see that volatility being translated into the rand-dollar pairing, which is something that everybody looks forward to. And of course, the rand has been the best performing emerging market currency in the world this year, but that doesn't mean that this volatility will go away, because the scandal is still there. And of course, this future of President Cyril Ramaphosa is still hanging in the wind because of what is going to happen at the elective conference this weekend.
I suppose what is of interest for you and I, Xolani, is what does this mean for me in terms of how far the rand in my pocket will be able to go?
Well, this doesn't mean really a lot to you and me, except for the fact that we import a lot of goods from the rest of the world, and it's been shown that we import more than we actually export in the recent past. And it's not good as well when you look at those investments that we actually make. A weaker rand is not good for any economy, and as we sit now, those are going to be the things that people look at. There's been a lot of changes, Thabo, in how the market feels about President Cyril Ramaphosa, because the Ramaphosa that he came into office with in 2017, at least in the ANC office, seems to have gone away. Although he's seen as a reformist, there's a lot of concern about what happens if he does not emerge at this elective conference, because the market will be uncertain about the new leader who will take over the ruling party, and whether they are going to continue in this reformist agenda and the policies that have been set by the administration of President Cyril Ramaphosa. And those are the uncertainties that will really hurt the economy as a whole.
That is Newzroom Afrika's business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa. Much appreciated. Thanks so much for coming on this evening.